What happens when your worst fear becomes your reality? Hi, I'm Brent Cassidy. Welcome to Nightmare Success In and Out Podcast, where we explore how to overcome your fears and nightmares to set yourself free. We're going to be exploring this topic with guys I was in Leavenworth with. We're going to be talking about life before prison, life in prison, and life out of prison. These stories can be inspiring, sometimes sad. There's some humor, but hopefully you can come away with a nugget of something that will help you knock down some of the prisons you've built up in your own mind. Folks, today my guest is Paul Hartfield. Paul, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
So I was going to say Paul has a book, and for those watching on YouTube, it's called For Such a Time as This. And I believe, Paul, did it just come out?
It's been out about a year, maybe a little longer, year and a half, something like that.
Okay, so it's fairly new.
Fairly new, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Paul, one of the things I remember about you is we were lucky enough to have our family come to see us, and I got to see your family, and you got to see my family in the visiting room. And the other thing that really sticks in my mind is that you were a good singer, and I remember particularly the one Easter. And it was really unusual because they actually allowed the inmates to invite their family and walk through the hallway into the gymnasium, which was really, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but for us who were actually inmates, for our families to enter the area that we were living was unusual. I mean, it was a real eye-opener for my family to be able to walk down that hallway. They couldn't see down where the A and B and D or C and D dorms, but it was still an experience. And that day, and my family was there, and it was an Easter service, and you and your son got the opportunity to be up and entertained us with your singing. It was fantastic.
Well, thank you. That was an interesting time. In fact, that was the first time, and I was told the first time in 16 years they've allowed inmates' families to enter the gymnasium there to have a service. They used to do it, I understand, years and years and years ago sometimes, but that was the first time in over 15 years. It was put together by myself and a couple of inmates who we rallied the warden to try and do that. We thought it was good, and the chaplain got behind it, and pretty soon it became a reality.
And it was really something. When something like that happens in prison, it's a big deal because it's hard to get anything accomplished like that in prison. I mean, it's not something you go and say, hey, what about this? This is a good idea, right?
Absolutely. We had to submit a number of written requests. We had to meet. We actually had to visit with the warden because he didn't want any trouble, of course. And you're right. It takes a long time to get something like that accomplished.
Yeah. And I remember when we were all getting ready to go into the gymnasium, there was a lady out there, and I can't remember what her name was, but she was trying to, the wind was blowing that day. It was April, and some days can be warmer than others. That one happened to be a little colder, and we were all kind of huddled up, getting ready to go in there. And she was trying to break up all the families. You can't touch, can't hug, can't do. I was like, oh my gosh, we're at Easter here.
Yeah, I do recall that. Yeah.
Yeah. So Paul, take us back a little bit. Where did you grow up? Your family, siblings? What was Paul doing back at a young age?
Well, I was born and grew up in Texas.
Okay.
Grew up in the eastern part of Texas, a little north of Houston. And I never left the state till I was 18 years old. So it was a different upbringing for me than maybe a lot of people. I loved music, became a professional musician, and for 26 years, I was a professional singer of symphonic, opera, and oratorio pieces. And so it was, it was a different type of life. But what happened was I really, really look back on those days as wonderful days growing up in the South. It's a little simpler than what it is today.
Yeah.
And,
well, usually they don't let those Texans leave. Once you're there, you
that's
can't
true.
cross
That's
the borders.
True. Yeah, that's very true. But I did get away. And when I met my wife, when I went to graduate school in Kansas City, I met my wife to be. And when we got married, we thought the Midwest was a really wonderful place to raise a family, and so we just stayed in the Midwest.
So did your mom and dad, you had brothers and sisters?
I do. I have two brothers and one sister.
Okay, and did they stay in Texas and you moved to the Midwest, or how did that
They
work?
they have never left the state either. They all three of them still live there, and they've never left the state.
That's great. That's great. So when you were, did you tour when you were doing this with the
I did.
music?
I did. I did a lot of things around the U.S. Most of my stuff was in Europe and abroad. Uh, I was much younger then, so I did a lot of traveling. In fact, when I retired from that, I retired because I had still had young children at home, and I was getting tired of being away from them for so long. So it was more or less a tour. It's more or less kind of like an independent contractor,
Yeah.
something along those lines.
So your kids, when I guess did the kids' wife, did they travel with you, or how did that work when you do that type of stuff on the road?
Occasionally, I we would travel together. I remember when my first child was born, my daughter Maria. I was making my European debut in Paris, France, and I was so torn up about being away from them because it was a 3 month long contract. And so I flew them over, and they spent a month with me, which was great because I was really difficult to be
Homesick.
away from your family. Yeah, homesick and
Yeah.
difficult to be away from them at that time period. But I later on, my wife would travel. We went to Hong Kong together. We went to Barcelona, Spain together. So I took her as much as I could, but we have three children, and they were a handful.
Well, and you, I mean, in a job like that, I mean, the perk benefit with it, you got to see the world.
I did. A lot of people wait till they retire and they go to see the world. Well, I saw all the world by the time I was 30. And so there's, I think I've never been to Australia, but I've been almost everywhere else. So Africa, Europe, the Far East, the Middle East, everywhere you can imagine.
What was your favorite?
Well, a lot of people ask me that, and I'd have to say my favorite place to go still to this day was Cape Town, South Africa.
Wow.
I thought
Okay.
it was one of the great universal cities that we never hear about because it's just so far away.
Right.
But it was a wonderful experience. It had mountains on one side and an ocean on the other. So it was just great experience.
So, Paul, when you retired out of that music world, what did you do after that? What was your business world?
Well, I was looking for something I could do. I didn't have many skills other than music, but if you remember in the early 2000s, real estate was a hot market.
Oh, yeah.
And so I began to look into that, and I started a company where we purchased single family homes, rehabilitated them, then resold them.
Okay.
And it really took off. I was shocked because I didn't know that much, but as I learned and went through this, you learn a lot. And so by the time we got to 2006, we had about 350 single family homes that we owned.
Wow. That sounds like a lot.
It was a lot. We
Trial
grew.
by fire. I mean, you
Yeah.
must have figured it out while you were walking through it.
Well, I didn't figure out everything, as you already know.
Well, sometimes that can happen, though. I mean, I always say, and I was giving a speech the other day to a college group, and I said, one of the things about growing, we went from 3 states to 22 states, is that when things are really good, you can kind of take your eye off the ball and get lazy and hit a blind spot. And, that's when things surprise you, and then you've got to handle things as they come at you. And sometimes it feels like an avalanche.
I think that is probably so very true. So very true. You get successful and you begin to get a little lackadaisical about what you're doing, and anything can happen.
Yeah. So tell me, what did happen, Paul? How did it? Because it's for those who don't know Paul, he's a very nice man, and he's a kind of a gentle soul. So it's always interesting with all these different stories how people end up where they end up. So Paul, where did it start, and how did the nightmare begin for you?
Well, as I said, we were doing really quite well with the real estate company. We were successful enough that we even opened up our own mortgage company at the same time. So
Okay.
we were buying, selling, and so forth. And then about 2007, as you know, we began to have difficulties because the real estate market or real estate bubble burst, shall we say, and everyone was beginning to struggle, and we were no different. We began to have problems with cash flow. We began to struggle with a number of properties. Nothing would sell, so we had to go into a defensive mode of renting or leasing. And that was always difficult because when your renter or leaser leaves, you really have to go back in, redo it again. And so you're
Right.
spending money there. So at about 2007, it was coming down fast. And our multi-million dollar company dwindled to less than $100,000 in about 3 to 4 weeks.
Wow.
And so we were struggling. We decided we just could not go, so we closed the company. Shortly after that, I had a heart attack in April of 2008. It was probably more stress related than it was
That's what I was
physical.
going to say. That was probably a stress heart attack.
Yeah, it was horrible. I mean, and I was arriving at church one day, and I opened the door to my car, and it was just a strange feeling in my chest. And thank goodness there was a good friend of mine that drove up at the same time, and he would not let me go in the church unless we went and had it checked out. It was a good thing because it required that I have a number of stents put in. So that was kind of going that way. And, uh, you know, you probably understand this, Brent. When that happens to you and your business falls apart, you become very depressed and very just your anxiety levels very high. You're very just you can't really deal with things very well.
Yep.
And so I was struggling very much so. But after a while, you get past that, and even though everything has failed, you've just got nothing that works or anything like that. You feel like things are doing well, and then one Thursday morning, no, I'm sorry, one Tuesday morning, at about 9 o'clock, the doorbell rang, and I went down and answered it, and a very lovely lady and a gentleman introduced themselves as agents of the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Mm.
And I said, "How may I help you?" And they said, "Well, we'd like to see some of the records of your company that failed. We have some things that are not quite exactly the way we feel like they should be." I naively thought, well, okay, that's no problem. I have nothing to hide. So I asked them to allow me to finish getting dressed, and I would meet them at my office and we could go through anything I want to. And that was the beginning of sorrows, as you can imagine.
Mm. Yeah.
The
Did
After
you
they
call an attorney at the time, Paul, or did you just go let him in?
I just let them in because I was naive at the time. I'd
Yeah.
never been in troubles, and I thought, yeah, I got nothing to hide. We
Yeah.
can
Show them
record.
what they want to see.
That's
Right.
what I thought. Yeah, let them see what they want to see. Well, I should have known that they don't start looking at you unless they're looking for something to find fault in you, and I didn't know
Right.
that.
Yeah.
And so anyway, then they come back and said, "Well, we need to see things." And by that time, I talked to some people, and I asked them if it was okay if I have my attorney present. They didn't like that, of course, and said that they would just subpoena the rest of them, which they did. They subpoenaed the rest of the records. So, as you are probably aware and have talked with others, the difficult time of going to prison is not when you get to prison, but from when they indict you to the time you get to prison, which for
Yeah.
me was a little over 2 years.
Yeah.
And so it's two of the worst years of my life. And so the one thing left to another, and the prosecutor began to suggest. He says, "Well, I think you've committed some act of bank fraud and money laundering." I had to ask him what money laundering was. I mean, you talk about being a real naive person. I wasn't even certain what that was. And when he described it to me, I said, "Well, we do deposit checks that we get into our account." And he says, "Well, that's all it takes." Uh, Shortly after that, they come back and said, "We're going to indict you, for that." And of course, I hired attorneys, and I was prepared to go the distance because I didn't think I had done anything wrong. Now, after it was described to me what we did, which was everyday business use, by their definition, it was wrong. And
Right.
so I had to come to those terms, but I was prepared to go the distance with them. And so they came to me with an offer and said, "If you will say you did this, we will give you this, this, and this." And I said, I'm not comfortable with that. I think I would rather just take my chances in court. They said, "Well, if you go to court and lose, which 92% of them do lose," he
Right.
says, "you're going to get this, this, and this," which is considerably more. But I really felt strong about that. And so we were preparing to go to court, and then they called me in one last time, and they said, "Well, we need you to reconsider this, and you need to take this. It's an open and shut case for us, and if you don't, we will destroy you when it's over with." And I said, "Well, I'm prepared for that chance." They said, "Well, if you do not take this last offer we're going to give you, says we will indict your wife."
Mm.
And at that point, I felt like I could not take a chance, even though she was never involved in our business. She never knew anything about what was going on. I didn't want to take any chance of bringing her into that type of situation. So,
And Paul, that's such a strong thing that they have in their playbook,
oh,
and they use it. Well, people say, well, how does 97% of the people that get indicted plead? When they start stretching into family, a lot of times that's the folding mechanism, and I know so many people I've talked to that was one of the things that happened, and that's a tough one because you have to struggle with what you're dealing with, and then once you know that somebody else is going to get entangled in it, you don't want that for their world.
yeah. Well, it just it stopped me in my tracks. There was no
Yep.
question. And I said, well, I don't want to agree that I've committed the crime. I said, how about if I agree that I committed the crime of uh, conspiracy to commit? And they agreed with that. They said, that's fine with us as long as you take this. So I had to go up and I had to stand before the judge and say, yes, I did this. Yes, I did that. And it was very difficult because I had
Hmm.
not done that. But I could not possibly take a chance of my wife getting drug into something that who knows what they could turn it into. And
Well,
you're
well, Paul, speaking of your wife and kids in those 2 years, how did you guys get through that? I mean, I know I went through that with my kids and wife. How did the family survive?
well, like as I said earlier, Brent, it's really and you know this, of course. The time between your dying and the time between you are actually right in prison is the most difficult time. Prison's simple and easy,
Hmm.
but it was very difficult because I started going through my depression again. I couldn't hardly function. It's hard for me to get up. My wife was very concerned. We always had a very strong family, but I will say, even when this trouble happened, it solidified us even more. My two sons and my daughter became great patriots to surround the flag, shall we say. And
Hmm.
they were always there for, I told them that I was going to have to go away and that they had to take care of their mother some way. And they stepped up. So that was great, but it was probably the most agonizing time that I know in my 66 years.
Yeah. How old were
I
your kids at that point?
uh, well, two of them were out of the house, but I still
Okay.
had Robert, the singer that you
Hmm.
heard, and he was
Yeah.
still in high school,
Okay.
and they were good. I have to admit, I it was the most difficult thing for me to bring them into the bedroom one day and explain to them this is what's going to happen and so forth, and I thought I would lose them forever, but instead they stayed not only strong through it, but even stronger than it was before. So I'm
Hmm.
very thankful and feel very blessed about that.
Yeah. No, that's. I think it's such a big deal to have your family muscle up together and get through something that's a storm, and when you do that, I think it does make the ties even that much, the bonds that much stronger, because when somebody goes to prison, the family goes to prison,
Yeah,
and
very much so.
the whole family's dealing with it and dealing with whatever the outside is. You're on the inside, and
Right.
you feel emasculated because you can't help them on the outside. So it's a struggle, but there's so much gratitude in the fact that you have a family. Paul, you and I both know so many of the guys that we were with, we saw families disintegrate, or,
Yeah,
somebody would show up with divorce papers, and
sure,
man, what a dark place to get bad news.
sure. I saw that happen a number of times. You're right. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
horrible. It's a very horrible thing.
So Paul, what was the final deal that they gave you?
Well, as I said, I had to agree to it, and it was 78 months, uh, 78-month sentence, and they wanted me to pay back like $2.4 million of restitution, and I would agree that I would sign an agreement saying that I would never do anything in the real estate profession again.
Hmm.
And I wasn't ever planning to. But what I thought would happen, as you know, uh, they they many times judge our sentence on the loss
Right.
amount. And so what I was hoping we could do is when we got to the sentencing, we could debate or argue the loss and get it down that they went with the prosecutor all the way across. So, I knew it was going to happen and I was prepared. They were very, very understanding to the point that they let me self surrender. And I'm assuming you've talked about that on your podcast. And
Hmm.
to me, that's a blessing because you're able to kind of prepare, get everything together before you leave to go.
Yeah, and it's a weird time period when that time that you've actually pled to the time that you find in the mailbox where you're going to go. You've got time to think about that, and then you've got that day, that time that you have to stand in front of that gate. What was going through your mind?
Well, I was very down about it. It was I had to my first assignment was the federal prison camp in Duluth, Minnesota, and my wife.
Sounds cold.
Oh, it was because I had to
For a
go.
Texas boy.
Yeah, I had to go on December 27th, and
Oh,
there were mountains and mountains of snow everywhere. And my wife drove me. I did told her I wanted to just take a bus and go there by myself. She would have no part of that. She says, "No, I'm going to take you," and she did. And it was hard for her to drop me off. I knew it would just destroy her, but she did, and I went in and went through the procedure, of being accepted, shall we say, or
yeah.
processed
Processed.
to the
Yeah.
prison system. And I, by the time I was done, it was nighttime, and I walked out. And Minnesota, you're right, is a cold, cold place. I think that night it was like 12 below or something, super cold. And I was very, very just thinking of ways that, is there some way I could off myself or something to get
Mhm.
out of this misery? Because it's just not something I'll be able to handle for 5 or 6 years, whatever I have to go. And then I saw out of the corner of my eye as I stand outside a person walking up to me, an inmate. And I thought, well, this is my first test. I better be ready to defend myself here. And he introduced himself and he said, "My name's Jeff." He said, "I was just headed over to the chapel for the 7 o'clock Bible study. Would you like to come?" And it was like a burden had been lifted off of me. And I told him I would love to go. And so that was my first night there. It really put me at ease when he
Yeah.
did that. And I was so thankful that he came up and asked for me to do that.
Paul, I think that's one of the things that people see stuff on TV and they try to because it gets good ratings of violence and all those different things. But I think one of the things that surprised me, just as you, is that first night, that first day of how many different people want to help you. They know that you're because they've done it themselves, and they want to give you that helping hand to get you transitioned into this unfamiliar world. And man, do you appreciate that? Because it does. It kind of just steadies you, and your mind just takes a shifts gears down to the low gear, and calms down a
Right,
little bit.
right.
Yeah.
No, you're exactly right. It's I think that's the shock uh, that you receive. I think you go in there and you expect to see all these type of prison guys like what you see on TV, and many of them,
Yeah.
are just men that made a mistake and are trying to get home. I can still remember the day I met you for the first time, and I
Yeah.
thought when I went away, I said, "Well, this seems like a nice guy. What in the world is he doing here?" And I said about so many, and so
Yeah.
people ask me today, said, "Well, what are the people like in prison?" And I said, "Well, there's two types of people. There's the kind you meet and you say, 'What are you doing here? You don't belong here. You should be at home or something.' And then there's another kind you meet, you think, 'What are you doing here? You should be locked in a cage and the key thrown away.'" There's those two type of,
Yeah.
of differences that you meet. But
It,
I met so many people who were just regular people, and they made a mistake, or maybe they didn't even make a mistake, but yet were convicted anyway.
right.
And they all had a good attitude that they were going to try and get through and get home back to their families.
So the being that far away, Paul, did how did that work with you and your family? Because that's not a close, I think you're supposed to be within 500 miles.
That's right, but I was a little over 600 away.
Hmm.
It was difficult. I mean, I only got to see my wife and my children about once every month and a half,
Hmm.
and so uh, and it was also very expensive because you just couldn't drive up there and see me and drive back. It's a 10-hour drive up there, 10-hour drive back. So when they'd come for a weekend, time they did hotel, food, and stuff like that, they've spent over $1,000, and it was expensive. We left being a two-income family now to one income, so they had to watch their dollars, and every month and a half wasn't doing it for me. And that's when I got to the point after about a year, I said, I've got to try and see if I can get closer to home. So I went to the warden, who was a very understanding man, and I said, look, I'm over 600 nautical miles from home. Is there any possible way I could transfer just to get closer? And he understood. He was reluctant because it's so cold there. Nobody transfers in.
Right.
Once you're
Everybody
sent
wants
there,
out.
yeah, once
Yeah.
you sent there, you're usually there. And
Yeah.
he said, "Well, I'll look into it." And I guess it wasn't 3, maybe 4 weeks after that, I hear a call over the PA system for my name to go to the secretary's office. And when I went in, they said your transfer has been approved. And I asked where, because they were saying it might be in Oklahoma, it might be in Indiana, just as long as you're within 500 miles. And they
Mhm.
said, where you requested? Leavenworth. And the greatest part of it was they said, how would you like to go? Which shocked me because I thought, do I have a choice? They said, yes, we can give you a bus ticket and you can go there, or you can have, if you're married, you can have your wife come and pick you up. And to me, that was a joy beyond compare.
Oh my
And
gosh.
yeah, so she
And
came.
how long had you been in? About a year?
I've been in there 14 months.
Okay.
Yeah, and they usually don't let you out until about after 16 months. But
Mm-hmm.
I got lucky, I guess. You know me, I never got in a lot of trouble or anything like that. So
No.
yeah, so I was pretty, pretty boring. And I think the warden, who he had heard me sing a couple times too, I think he kind of felt, well, we need to help this guy out, and I appreciate him doing that. So my wife came and picked me up. We had 11 hours to get from Duluth to Leavenworth, and we had to, we got to have a great meal. Our family, rest of our family, met us there. You remember that restaurant directly across from the camp there?
I
We,
sure do.
yeah,
That it was the little house from across the street from the big house is what
that's
they
it.
had on.
That's it. Yeah, they have a wonderful steak dinner there, and so forth. And we don't get to eat steak too many times in the prison system. So my family and I, we met there at about 5, a little before 5. We had a nice dinner together, and then she dropped me off in front of the big house, and they processed me, and I stayed in the hole that night. And then the counselor came and picked me up the next morning, take me over to the camp.
So, Paul, what was, going from prison to prison, and then you're at Leavenworth. So the good part is that you're right next to home. The I don't know what Duluth was like, but I know what Leavenworth was like. What was your opinion of everything, getting into the system and getting processed through and being in the hole? And
Yeah. Well, they were really very different. Duluth is a standalone camp. It does not have a larger house. It's not a satellite. It's situated on at an old Air Force base. So you've got things in Duluth that you don't have there in Leavenworth because that's really a satellite camp and so forth. I mean, we had a full size chapel. I mean, it
hmm
was a full size church, seated over 300 people. We had a big theater that you could go watch your movies in, and so forth. I mean, it was just it was different, and it also there were over 900 men when I was there, and then
mm
the transfer down to a place that had about 300 or a little over
hmm
300 was a lot different, and being a satellite camp was really different too.
hmm
The dormitories in Duluth were much better, but like I said, that was an old Air Force base, so of course it
Right.
will be better and everything. I was particularly amazed when I got to Leavenworth. The dormitory system, we had an open dormitory, and then if you were really good, you could go down to a 2-man.
Yeah, they call that the suburbs.
Yeah, so that was kind of interesting, but it was quite different. There seemed to be a lot more of mine and your type of prisoner, the white collar people in Duluth, than there was in Leavenworth.
hmm So I'm trying to think what was your job? I can't remember, Paul, what you did at Leavenworth. Now that I remember you in the chapel and all that.
But well, I worked for Unicor for a long time.
That's right. That's
But
right.
it got a little I don't know, I needed to change or something like that. And so,
Well, for those who don't know what Unicor is, it's really kind of like a factory where they take parts, or they take things out of federal buildings and they take them apart and sell the parts off. But it's almost kind of like an assembly line, factory line of prisoners and inmates doing the disassembling things, right?
verbatim, almost
Yeah.
verbatim. That's exactly what it is, like a factory. Then after a while, my roommate, Ron Slovacek,
Hmm.
asked me if I would come out and work with him. He says, they're looking for somebody. Would you work with me out at the fort?
Hmm.
And I said, sure, why not? And so I went to the entomology department there at Fort Leavenworth. And that was really a fun time too. I think you worked at the golf course
I did.
and
Yeah.
so forth. And it was good to kind of get away, wasn't it? Sometimes.
Well, it was a huge thing, and I think for us that had been confined and being able to get community custody and actually get a taste of seeing people out and about and feeling that. And then what was kind of strange to me was is that we'd go over there, and then at 3:30 we'd go back to prison.
Yeah, it was a strange feeling, wasn't it?
There was.
But you really enjoyed that time being away from prison during the day.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I never could quite figure out why there were two types of prisoners. There were the ones that wanted to get a good job and keep themselves busy and not lose themselves, try to keep being themselves.
Hmm.
And then there were the other guys that really just got lost in the system and really became more institutionalized into their bad, ugly routines and stayed in that fenced in area and never left.
Yeah.
And there really just were two kinds. There were those that were trying to work and keep busy, and then there were other kinds that really slipped into a black hole.
Yeah, there wasn't much of a middle class. It was either this or that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
you're absolutely right. And that's I think the biggest shock I had in prison uh, was locating that type of philosophy between certain people and so forth.
yeah, yeah. Well, I know that there's ways, there's strategies of how you handle your time in prison. So many people did it differently. Like, I know there's hard days in prison. Paul, how did you handle like a hard day in prison? What did you do to kind of keep yourself afloat?
Well, I had a difficult case manager, uh, and he was all about making your life difficult, and he
Uh
wanted
huh.
to kind of really put his thumb down on you, and that was hard. But I think the thing that was great about being in Leavenworth was my family was less than 20 miles away, about maybe
Right.
25 miles away. So there was not a single visitation time on Saturday, Sunday, or Monday that I didn't either see my one of my members of my family, all of my members, or even friends and stuff that I know, and
Right.
colleagues and so forth. And so those visits would catapult me through the rest of the week.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a Christian, so I got involved in the chapel a lot
Right.
and tried to serve as much as I could there. But I can't stress and just as you said at the beginning of the podcast, I saw your family there as much as mine, and they came from St. Louis, right?
Yeah. Right.
So that was amazing, and I mean, it just would catapult you to the next visit.
And I think that's such a great way of saying that too, Paul. Is that my time and your time really we lived week to week so that we could see them again, and that fueled us up to. And it's almost like you got to straddle the fence a little bit from the outside world to the prison world, so that you could stay connected enough that you weren't so far removed from what was going on in that world. That was the thing I saw from a couple of the guys that I was friends with that didn't have that, and
Sure.
they struggled with being so far away from that feeling of freedom or that feeling of a touch of a family member or a friend. And man, I think that makes, I always have a tremendous amount of gratitude for the fact I didn't have to go through time like that, because I think that time would take on such a different dimension if you were just doing the time on your own.
I agree with that. It helped that our families or our friends or whatever would visit, and it would, as I use the word, it would catapult you through the
Hmm.
rest of the week. And so, no matter how hard a day you had, you were able to deal with it because hey, I'm going to see my family again in a couple of days. Uh,
Yep.
so that's important. And you're right. It was very sad that you and I witnessed those who either lost their families or their families refused to come see them, or because I don't know about you, but I knew people who never ever got a visit, not
Yeah.
once. And I can't imagine how hard that would be.
Yeah, and I almost think if you looked at it, there was probably when I first got there, I think there was like 400 and some odd people. It was really overcrowded, and they've had people on cots and everything, but it got less people as we went along. But maybe 30, 35 people got visits out of that whole population of
Yeah.
people, and that it was a small percentage,
Hmm.
small
Well,
percentage.
I know I certainly counted a blessing that I got to see my family as much as I did.
Yeah. So, Paul, you get into this thing. You've got how much time did you serve at Leavenworth? So you were there 14 months in Duluth. So you
Uh,
had how many years left when you got to the Leavenworth?
I think I had 3.5 years left. My,
Okay.
with your good time, I think my sentence ended after 62 months. I think it was.
Yeah, because I think it's like 84% of your
Yeah,
time or something like
correct.
that,
And
federal. Yeah.
so I was there about 3.5 years total
Hmm.
in all. And you know, I always tell people I wouldn't like to go back, but it is a great learning experience for you. You
Yeah.
learn a lot about yourself.
Yeah.
You learn a lot about other people, and what you do is come to have a great respect for uh, the things that you need to change or decide, or try and think about in your own way.
I totally agree with that. I mean, I think when and I heard somebody say this not too long ago, but your world in prison is like being in black and white, and then when you get out, it turns back to color because it's just you're
That's
getting through that time. You're taking it a day at a time. You can't look too far ahead because that's claustrophobic and overwhelming. But if you can eat it a day and a week, you can get through it.
sure, sure, very much so.
And it's funny how inmates they chop up their time. Well, I made it through another spring, or
Right,
this is my
right.
last Christmas, or whatever that is.
Yeah.
It's how you adapt and survive. And the other thing, probably um, that was different. You didn't have air conditioning at Leavenworth.
No, that's true. You didn't, and it got a little warm sometimes.
It,
But
it
that
did.
was, you were asking earlier, and I'm sorry I forgot to bring this up about how you got through certain days. As
Yeah.
you know, almost everyone walked.
Yes.
Everyone would walk. I mean, they were out there on the track or something like that walking. And I
For
wish,
miles.
yeah, miles. And I remember there was a time when I was doing 4 to 5 miles a day. Now
Yeah.
I'd be lucky to do 400 or 500 feet. But you didn't think about it then because it was
No.
just something you did, and it kept you both good health wise, and it also kept you focused to where you think we're not thinking about how bad the day was. So,
Yeah,
but
and I think it always.
everybody I knew walked.
Oh yeah, and it felt so much better to be outside of that building than to be inside that building.
Sure.
That building to me was so claustrophobic because I mean there wasn't much in that building. You
No.
had your A block, your B block, your C block, your D block, and you had that cafeteria in the middle, and you had the gymnasium on one side, the commissary on the other.
uh,
That was it.
that's
That
it.
was it.
That's the whole camp. Yeah.
Little
It was
rundown
a lot.
schoolhouse.
Yeah.
So
It,
tell me, Paul. So you're getting close to the door. 6 months to the door, being free. What did you start thinking, and what's going on in your mind?
well, let me. As I said earlier, I had a real difficult case manager, and of course, he was going to do all he could to keep me there. And if you recall, we were going through a time whenever they had closed a number of halfway houses. So
Mm-hmm.
the way they remedied that was they were just extending a lot of the people's
Of
sentences.
time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was very, very concerned because I had gotten a date of February 28th, 2018, and I was so looking forward to it. And about December, 1st of December, my case manager called me and says, "Well, you've now become a victim of the closed halfway houses. We can't send you to a halfway house until May."
Mm,
I just, it just took all
mm.
the wind out of me. I was so devastated. And I said, well, is there some way to, I said, I live here in Kansas City. Can I just do home confinement? I said, we don't do home confinement here, confinement. and
Hmm.
I was just devastated. So my family, my daughter and my wife happened to visit me that weekend, and they were livid about it,
Hmm.
because they were so looking for me to come home. And I said, it's nothing I can do. That this is the Federal Bureau of Prisons, and the rules they make are incontrovertible.
Hmm.
And but anyway, a strange story. They got very angry about this, and so they both of them. My daughter lives in Hawaii, and my wife here in Kansas City. They began contacting or calling the Federal Bureau of Prisons regional office every single day, and they were
Wow.
pushing to do this and to do that. And I mean, every day they would do 2 or 3 calls, and so forth like that. And I
Good
guess
for them. Good
I
for
guess
them.
the regional office finally got tired of them calling, and so one day my daughter called, and the we got a hold of the regional director, and she said, "Well, I've been looking at your father's file here, and he's pretty boring. He doesn't really cause
He's a
any
boring
problem, does
prisoner.
he?" Yeah, and she said, "Well, no." Says, "Well, we have a new program, or it's not a new program, but it's a program that exists that he would fit under." And Brent, I'm sorry, I can't think of the name of it now, but it basically meant that was you were such a high level person of not getting in trouble that
Hmm.
they were going to just bypass anything and send you straight home. And she said, I think he'll qualify for that. And
Wow.
so anyway, one thing led to another, and they said, we're going to let you out on the 28th, and your wife can pick you up at 9 a.m. and you just go straight on home. So I didn't go to a halfway house, and it was really quite nice because uh, I don't know, I understand. I haven't been to a halfway house, but I understand sometimes they can be rather depressing too.
Oh gosh, the one that was in St. Louis, which they've now closed down here this last year, I I think it was worse than anything that was at Leavenworth. Just the
Yeah,
filth
that's
and
what
the
I've been told.
violence, and yeah,
Yeah, so I was very fortunate. I could not cannot tell you how happy I was, and when I went in to see the
I can't
case manager,
imagine, Paul, because I mean,
yeah,
you thought you were going to do all this extra
oh,
time, and
well,
all
I
of a sudden
did.
they just say, "Here you are."
Yeah, well, the case manager, when I went in, I thought, oh, he's going to be very angry because he won't see me stay another 3. He said,
Yeah.
well, yeah, you're on this blah, 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 blah program. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, you're very lucky. You're only the second person I've seen in 18 years get on that program. And I said, well, I'm glad I won.
And he didn't have anything to do with it.
There's nothing he could do about it, right? He was pretty
Yeah.
well stuck with it. And so
Yeah.
that's how it went. To me, it was a very uplifting time because I went through, I thought, defeat, and then I
Yeah.
got picked up again to make you feel like, hey, there is some justice here.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. And the
you
fact
see,
that your family was able to make
yeah,
something move in that system is almost unreal.
I'm sure the regional office was very tired of hearing from that. I'm
Warm
sure,
down.
yeah.
So you get out. Who's there to get you when you get out?
My wife picked me up. My youngest son, who at that time was a junior at the University of Oklahoma, drove up
Yeah.
the night before. He was there. My other son, Paul Jr., who's a captain in the United States Army, uh, was on base, but he was FaceTiming. Now, I don't know
Okay.
if you remember, Brent, but whenever I went in, FaceTime didn't exist, or it didn't exist the way it did then. And then
No.
my daughter was FaceTiming from Hawaii.
Yeah.
So when I got
Yeah.
in the car and they showed me these 2 phones, and I said, because I thought they had just recorded that the night before, I didn't
Exactly.
realize it was real.
It's live.
Yeah, so I had to understand that, they're talking. You can talk to them right now. I said I had no idea you could do that. So they picked me up. We drove straight home. It was unlike anything. And I don't know if you had this situation, but driving home, it seemed the car was going so fast
Isn't that funny
because,
how that
yeah,
happens? It feels
because
like everything's moving so fast.
everything is moving so fast, and I thought, wow, we're going so fast. And they were going maybe 55 or 60.
Right.
But I thought that was an interesting thing. And I think it's because we've been put away so long and we have
It's
just,
not used to moving that fast.
a regimented way we do things. And that's the way it
Yeah.
happens.
I had
Uh,
the same phenomenon. It was
yeah.
really strange.
And I thought, wow, this is really strange. But it was a very happy day.
Yes. So, Paul, tell me what now? What's the world going on now in Paul's world?
I'm retired now. I play a lot of golf, but one of the things that I did, I don't know if you heard about it, but I was very concerned before I left prison about inmates I would meet, and they would have absolutely no contact. Just like we said, they'd have no family, no friends. Uh, they had no way to go to the commissary and get just basic needs. As you know, everything costs.
Mm.
You go to do email, it costs. You do a phone, it costs. Everything. And I was very concerned about that. So when I when I was released, my wife and I started a ministry. We call it, or it's called Hartfield Missions. And if any of your people want to check it out, it's www.hartfieldmissions.com. And what we do is we support financially inmates who are struggling inside the prison system, or inmates who have gotten out or trying to get started. Because as you know, some people walk out and they have nothing and nothing
Right.
to go to. And we raise money to give to these individuals. We try and pick those that we feel like are struggling, because some people, as you know, in prison make more money than
Yeah, they
than
get
some of
prison
us do.
rich.
Yeah, that some of us do outside of prison.
Right.
And so we've been in that ministry now for since I've gotten out. We tell people who donate to us, we are a nonprofit. We tell people who donate to us that 100% of your donation goes to help an inmate or an inmate's family. We don't take anything for salary or expenses or anything like that. And so that's been kind of something that we worked on since I've been free. Because when you're retired, you have the time to do it. And in fact, I just got a call from I see just from an inmate who's released now that we helped financially, and we're trying to help him get his car going so he can now get to his job. And that's kind of what we've been doing here. I
I
do.
love it, Paul. I just love that. I mean, because that is something that affects somebody immediately, and by you being an ex-inmate, you know how important that is. And the fact that you're not only doing it while they're in prison, but helping them when they're out of prison, because like you said, there's some guys that get out and they have nothing,
Nothing.
and then they have to find a job, they have to find a place to live, and all those things are tough interviews, tough places. There's boxes you have to check, and if you check the box, they say no, then you're homeless or you don't have a job.
Right.
So I just think that's fantastic. You're doing that. I
Well,
commend
thank you.
you.
Thank you so much. It's a passion that my wife and I have. A friend of both mine and yours, when he got out, he served like 15 years almost on a drug charge. And I called him. I said, I'm so happy you're out and everything. And he said, well, says I got these job interviews, but I don't have any clothes to wear and so forth
Mm.
like that. So we sent him up some cash to get him some new set of clothes and so forth, and he had the job the next time that I talked to him. So it's helping these people, because like we said at the beginning of the podcast, there are so many who just want to get back into society and rebuild
Yep.
their life. And it's hard because I'm one inmate that I know is flying here to Kansas City this coming weekend, and I hadn't seen him in a long time. But he runs a Bible study that I go to on Friday mornings at 6:30 in the morning for inmates all around the country. So you see people from everywhere you can imagine. But he's coming here, and the reason I bring him up is I still remember the day when I was in Duluth, and I went to probably my second visitation. My wife had come down, and his wife had come down too. And his wife went to him and told him, says, "Well, I want you to enjoy this visit with your two children, because it's the last time you're going to see them. I'm leaving you,
Mm.
and you'll never see them again." And
Mm.
I thought at the time how I could have handled that, and I wouldn't have been able to, but I thought he handled it so bravely. And his two little children, one must have been 5, the other maybe 7. They were just crying away when he left, and he got down to their level, and he said, "Don't worry, Daddy will be here." And I've just been so impressed with him and everything like that. So there are inmates like that, and we
Mm-hmm.
try to find them out. It's hard. We do some of the inmates both in federal and in the state prisons, and we try and locate the ones who are in need and try and help them financially if we can.
Paul, it's just a big, big deal. I mean, and the thing that is so big about that is the one thing you don't ever want to take away from somebody is hope. And by doing something that you're doing, you're giving these people hope, and that's got to fill you up.
Well, it's very, I don't know if I'd say gratifying, but it's uplifting
Yeah.
because even when I was, we didn't have a lot of money when I went away. Like I said, we stopped being a two-income family and became a one-income family.
Right.
And I was worried if my wife would be able to survive financially,
Yeah.
the house, all these things, the automobiles. And even myself, I would see things pop up on my commissary list, money, that I didn't know about, that somebody had sent, and I was so thankful. And that's the reason toward the end, I began to meet people who were either by themselves or had lost their family or something, and they were struggling, trying just to get basic needs. Uh, and it's hard for them. Like I have one guy who's writes me incredible, beautiful letters, and he's serving 3 life sentences
Mm.
in a state prison in Texas. And
Mm.
we support him financially because he has no family. He just has his mom, and his mom's elderly and can't give him anything. And he writes such glowing letters to where he says he's so thankful that there's someone like us out there that would help him. Even though he says I regret what put me in here. Uh, I don't know any way to change it. I'm just going to serve my time and be happy. And but I just am so thankful that you taken me as a person to support.
I love that. I think it's fantastic. Paul, tell me about your book for such a time as this. What's this book
Well,
about for people who want to get this?
this is it's kind of a book about my time uh, when serving in the prison system. Believe it or not, you're in here. You won't know
Um,
that, but you might if you read it. You might say, "Hey, I remember when that happened," or
I
something like
recognize
that.
that guy.
Yeah, I had bad days whenever I just was felt like a caged animal and said, "I got to get out of here. I can't take this anymore." And my wife sent me. She'd always send me uplifting emails to try and help me get out of it, and she sent me one day, and she says, you've done. It was shortly after the Easter program that you talked about. She
Yeah.
says you've done so wonderfully trying to pull that together, and you've done these things. Don't give up. You can make it through this. And I was saying, no, I can't. No, I can't. And she quoted a verse from the Bible, and it's from a book called Esther. Esther chapter 4, verse 13. And what's happening is Esther is the queen of the Persian Empire, and one of the shaman there have decided that they've hatched a plan to where they're going to kill and destroy the entire Jewish nation. They were captured at that time, so they were going to destroy the whole Jewish nation. Esther is Jewish. Nobody knew that time, but she was Jewish. And so her uncle come to her and said, "You've got to do something about this. You're the queen." And she says, "I can't, because as queen, if I approach the king without him summoning me, he could have me beheaded." And her uncle said, "Well, if you don't do something, we will receive help from afar," meaning God. And
Hmm.
then he says one last thing. He says, "And who knows but that you should come to your royal position for such a time as this." And I
Mm.
always think that applies to our life. Who knows that we might not be put in prison at those dates, at those times, for such a time as this, that we would talk to someone, help to someone, or lead someone in some way to help them. And so it takes through the chapters of basically what I've discussed with you today, of how I got into this mess, how I got to the prisons, how I dealt with it, some of the things that we talked about. I talk about some of the people. I don't use names, of course, but and how I was very moved by some of the people and how they affected my life. I mean, what I discovered was uh, there were really nice people in prison. There were not.
Right.
There were some that were difficult, but they were really people who
As
were
there is
good.
on the outside.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah, and so forth. So it's a book about my time, but it's basically spiritually devised from a Christian standpoint, and I think it's something that both the Christian person would enjoy, or the non-Christian, because it basically tells, here's what happened, here's how I
Hmm.
got here, here's what God did for me, and here's how I got out of it for this point.
I like it. Nuggets of wisdom of your experience. Paul, where do you get that book?
Well, it is on Amazon. I hear that sometimes it's hard to purchase on Amazon. I don't know why, but that way it is. And I always tell people, if you want to get a copy of it, you can contact me at that webpage, www.hartfieldmissions.com.
Okay,
And my daughter runs the public relations, so she sends them out right away. And
perfect.
we'd be glad to send them out to somebody. We we started out when we first got all of them. We sold them for $15 a copy and used that to open up our ministry to help people. Now I just say I'll give you one, and if you want to send something to help us, we'd appreciate it, but you're not required to.
Can't wait to read it.
I
It's
hope
on
you
its
enjoy
way. It's supposed to be here tomorrow, I think.
it. It should be there tomorrow.
Yeah. So Paul, you're such a good guy and doing good things for people. Anything you'd like to impart to the audience here on your life and what's happened and
Well, I think I think that's a hard thing sometimes, because I think people sometimes, and I know I was this way before I got in trouble. Whenever I heard someone was getting in trouble, my first thought would be lock them up. They need to be locked up to commit a crime. Get them out of here.
hmm
Get them off the streets. And then, of course, when I uh, was incarcerated, and I began to meet so many different people. Yourself, I can just name them. So many different people, and they had different personalities, but they were in there for different things. I would say that I would impart that we should never continue to judge someone for a mistake they made, because we all make mistakes. There's
Yep.
nobody out here who hasn't made a mistake. You and I, we may be free right now, but we are felons forever. That'll
Yep.
never change.
Life sentence. Yeah.
Yeah, we can never own a gun. In the late 1800s, if you got sentenced to prison and you went and served your term, your slate was clean. You walked out, you were a new man. But
Right.
that's not the case. Now, I will say there's great strides that have been made in prison reform, but it still needs to go a lot farther. So, if I were to impart something to your audience, I would say this: give people another chance, give them a chance. And I think you will see that many of them are not only sorry for their mistake, but want to do everything in their power to make up for that mistake. I know I do. And
I so second that, Paul. Such a good statement because so many people are looking for second chances and they're trying to keep the hope alive and they're looking for opportunities and hoping that somebody will grab them and give them that opportunity to make another life for themselves.
so true. So true.
Yeah, Paul, just great stuff. I so appreciate you being on the show today and giving us your words of wisdom on. And I love what you're doing with your mission. That is right on to what should be going on because it's going to make an impact. And it's proud of that, Paul. That's really fantastic.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Folks, for those who, speaking of books, so we've got two books here today. For Such a Time as This, Paul Hartfield, and you got Brent Cassidy, Nightmare Success. Um, get them on Amazon. Get mine also on Barnes and Noble. For those, we love the likes and subscribing. Leave a review if you got time. Those are fantastic. I love those. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Paul, thank you so much, man.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Brent.
Nightmare Success, in and out.